Hello there, hi. Welcome to Butterfly Effect, a podcast all about interviewing people. I'm your host, Tristan Ettleman. Before we get to that interviewing part, here I am. I like how I've turned the hello there, hi thing into like how I start every show, and it's the lamest catchphrase. It's like it's just like an awkward dude going, like popping his head through a door. Hello there, hi, and then kind of stumbling his way into a conversation. But then again, that's me, so I'll keep it that way for now. I'll keep things short, since I rambled on about Weezer a lot last week before the actual interview. You can still check that out. That was a fun time. Good episode. Last episode was Seth S. Scott and that Weezer ramble. But nothing really going on except that on the show today, Mike Drucker. Really funny guy. I'm glad he came on. I'm very grateful. Because Mike Drucker's really, really funny. And honestly, this is like one of the... I probably laughed the most during this episode of any episode previous. So, there you go. Just speaks to Mike's comedic talent. And Mike has been a number of places. He was an assistant at SNL. He worked at Nintendo and IGN. And now he's a writer for The Tonight Show. And so, comedy, obviously, comedian, he does stand-up as well. But, like, we talk about some of the interesting stuff he's done, like, at Nintendo wasn't just straight-up comedy, although he worked that into some of the job, and the job he hated before he went and did comedy for real and all that stuff, and it was a really fun conversation. So, enjoy it, laugh, learn, live, love. I can't think of any other words that start with L that are relevant in this situation, but I'll see you on the other side. How have things been going with you?
Good. Sorry, just a sec. Good. I'm actually starting hiatus this week, which will be nice. I have a week off.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Every, 5 or 6 or 7 weeks of on with the show, we get a week off that's paid. So it's awesome.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And how's the podcast coming along? How to Be a Person?
Podcast is good. My co-host just moved to LA to work on a new show that I don't think I'm allowed to talk about, but she's working on a new show now. I'm allowed to say that she's leaving. She's working on a new show.
Sure.
And so we're going to start doing it as a Skype podcast. So there's going to be some new challenges, but we want to keep that going.
Yeah, you've had guests on that you've Skyped in before, though, right? Or do you do primarily that? I've only listened to a few.
We've done, I think it's probably been something like, 80% in person, 20% Skype, and now it'll just be 100% Skype.
Yeah. Well, that's what this podcast is, and ultimately, I think it's fine.
Yeah.
Like I hope so. I think so.
Yeah.
As someone that has a Skype podcast, but it does change. Like if the show was originally not that format, it can kind of change how it feels a little bit. But
right.
I think usually podcasts are fine with it.
Yeah.
They do it all right. But you've had some interesting guests on there, and you kind of toe the line of comedy people and just video game nerdy people.
Yeah.
They're all nerdy people, kind of.
Right. That's definitely, we're both nerdy people. I think I'm more on the video game side, so I always try to bring in people from my area of interest. And, and it's fun I think it's good for the podcast, because Dweck doesn't know a lot about it, but it's not like she hates it. It's not like when someone hates something, they're like, I refuse to learn. She just doesn't know.
Right.
So it's, nice. Because I think a lot of video game podcasts are people who already know everything and they know each other, and the audience already knows everything you're going to talk about, and you're sort of just confirming biases. So it's kind of nice to bring in new things.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that is probably the biggest issue with games stuff in general. Yeah. It's it kind of shuts people out a little bit.
Yeah.
But so where are you from, Mike?
I'm originally from South Florida.
Okay. So, and how was that?
It was good. South Florida is a good place to grow up. It's, Florida's crazy, but it's a good place to grow up. But there wasn't a lot that I saw that I wanted to do creatively down there. And, I I wanted to make video games when I was a kid. I really, really wanted to make video games as a kid, and I went to a magnet school for computer programming, ostensibly to learn how to make video games. Excuse me, sorry, I keep clearing my throat. Yeah, I went to high school to ostensibly learn how to make video games, and I realized I'm really bad at programming. I just wasn't good at it, and I really wish I was. Like, I like programming. I liked, when I could do it, I was very interested in it. It just wasn't a skill I had. I got too frustrated with it. So I was sort of like, okay, well, there's nothing I can really do in Florida. A lot of my friends became like tech guys, or they worked for like tech companies in Florida. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, all right, I want to do something creative. I think I want to be a writer. I didn't know how that worked.
Yeah.
But I knew that like publishing was in New York, and I was like, what, maybe I'll like try to work for like a book company. So then I went to NYU.
And so I'm going to back up real quick about the thing you said about crazy Florida. Why is it that that's the either reality or the perception?
And there's both a reality and a perception. The reason it's a perception is because Florida has very loose laws regarding getting police records.
Oh.
So it's very easy for reporters to just go, because every state has insane people, but for Florida it's very easy for a reporter to go in and just get all of the recent arrests.
Wow.
And when you're doing that, you can just go through every case file and be like, okay, this guy was arrested for like, crashing into a house on a riding lawnmower, whereas in a lot of states, a lot of that stuff is locked up until later on in the processing.
Yeah.
So Florida has very good very good or very bad, depending on your position on it, reporting laws. So it's easier to report on crazy things in Florida. That said, Florida is also a fascinating state demographics-wise because you have a very large immigrant population coming from, mainly the Caribbean. Then you have a lot of people who retire there, so they're like from the northern states. They're New Yorkers. Then you also have a large population of, people who have lived in Florida for generations, sort of more, you could say southern people.
Sure.
So there's a lot of different groups of people, and even among the immigrant groups, people from Cuba are very different from people from Puerto Rico, are very different from people from Haiti.
Right.
So you have a lot of very different groups together. And on the bright side, growing up as a kid, I grew up in a very diverse, even in the suburbs, a relatively diverse suburb environment. My schools were very diverse. And so, I didn't really have that. I didn't have sort of a monochromatic childhood, which was, I think, good, which was beneficial to me.
Yeah.
On the downside, you have a lot of different groups who want a lot of different things, and sometimes that leads to, people clashing. Like, I think when I was, at least in college, because I did some research on it, Florida has, like, I think the most hate groups of any state.
Oof.
You just have like, and again, like, that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be diversity. I just think that you have a lot of people who are escaping different elements of their life, and then they run into people that they don't want to be around. And I mean that in all, like, again, you got racist Southern people, then you have old Jewish people who just want to retire, and then you have, like, people who are escaping oppression, in other countries, and that can often be a strange environment. And
it leads to people eating people's face off.
And eating people, and because it's such a huge, huge port state, you have a lot of drugs coming in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like the Miami thing.
The Miami thing, which when I was a kid, like, it's not like something like, because I didn't grow up in Miami proper. I grew up about an hour north of Miami, but we'd go to Miami a lot for sporting events, and you'd be like, this is weird. Like, you could tell even as a child, like, there was weird. I don't know if I can swear, but
no, you definitely can.
There's weird shit going on in Florida.
Yeah.
So.
Well, when were you a kid? Was that the 80s?
I was born in '84, so.
Okay.
Like, I remember a little bit of the '80s, but even early '90s, you definitely remember just like, okay, all right.
Yeah, like that area in that time period was pretty.
Yes.
Weird. Got it. Yeah. Well, and so how did you like get into, I mean, obviously you played a lot of video games in terms of wanting to do a video game, make video games rather. But what did your parents do? Were they supportive of that kind of stuff? Were they like, oh, that's not a job, especially at that time?
They were, I think, because they saw like the tech boom going on. So I think in their heads they were like, okay, well, if we're supportive of him using computers and playing video games, you know, maybe he won't make video games, but he'll get a job like, you know, he'll be the next Bill Gates or something.
You're right. That's what they all say.
That's what they all say. They always say you're going to be the next Bill Gates, and nobody is.
If you're doing anything technologically or internet-oriented, it's like, what? Or next Mark Zuckerberg is what it is now.
Now it's the next Mark Zuckerberg. I also think I had the weird experience of, like, you know, right as I was graduating high school, I graduated high school in 2002, so, you know, it was right after 9/11 and right after the tech bubble burst. You know, like, the first time when you had, like, pets.com disappearing, like, if you remember, because you remember, like, early internet, like, everyone was like, we're never going to have any problems with this. You could just, people were just buying website names and selling them for millions of dollars. Like, it was this Wild West time that I remember everyone being like, get in. And right as I was graduating high school or finishing up my senior year, people were like, get out. So it was such a strange time, but they were very supportive. I also think that, you know, I was a really strange kid. And for my parents, I think that they just didn't know what to do with me a lot. Like, I was a very overweight, and I'm still overweight, but I was much more overweight when I was in middle school and high school, and I was, like, overweight, and I was sad, and I was a goth kid for a while.
Oh, wow.
And I think for them, they were like, you know, as long as he's not, like, doing something dangerous, we kind of are just going to let him do whatever.
Yeah, it's the alternative is not good.
Right.
Let's let him play video games and
sulk,
watch cartoons.
Right.
I don't know what he's
He'll
doing.
watch like Sailor Moon and sulk, and and like, you know, at least he's not like. I think that their fear was like I think that they genuinely thought I was going to be a school shooter, and it sounds like I'm being like facetious or joking about it, but I think that there was genuine concern that like I was going to go awry that way.
Well, you seem pretty well balanced.
No, I'm totally not, but thank you.
But like, why did you feel like that as a kid? I mean, it seems like your parents were like bewildered by it. Like they weren't like the reason why you were like this way.
They weren't the reason why. I think I just had, and I still do. I've always suffered from really bad depression. I think, and I still have like, you know, what comes with clinical depression, like mood swings and stuff.
Sure.
But I think as a teenager, I wasn't aware of that. So I thought, I wasn't aware of my own responsibility, you know, sort of my own, I guess you could say, like, self-creation. Like, again, I was, like, just this really overweight, you know, unshowered kid who thought that because he got good grades, everyone should love him, you know. And so, you know, I'd do that thing that, like, gothy, you know, annoying kids do where, like, I'd ask out a girl and she'd be like, not me, and you'd be like, no. And I'd be like, no one understands me. And I'm like, also, I'm not putting in any effort. I'm not putting in any effort, you know, but I didn't realize that. At the time, I just thought, like, you know, and it's not because my parents, you know, on the other side of it, it's not like they were like, you know, you're the best, so never change. You know, there were times when they were like, especially my mom, who was very nice about it, but I remember sometimes she'd being like, you know, maybe, like, and not in a mean way, but, like, maybe you should work on, you know, losing weight a bit or something. And as a teenager, you're always like, no, I don't want to change. Right. So I think that I didn't understand what was wrong with me, and I thought that I refused to address that there could be anything wrong with me.
Well, I don't want to lessen anything you experienced, but that sounds like every teenager.
It's basically every teenager. Basically what every teenager goes through. You know, except I think I didn't have the sort of social net where other people were like, hey, maybe you should change. Like, all my friends were also sort of like me.
Yeah. No, I the thing you described with asking out a girl or whatever was exactly me.
Yeah.
Like, I'd be like, all sad, like, no one likes me. I'm like, well, I literally have done nothing.
I've done nothing. I'm gross. You know, I'm kind of creepy. I'm not asking out people on my level, so I'm also shallow. Like, as shallow as I'm saying that she is, I have also participated in this assumption of looks thing.
Yeah. Were you self-aware of this at the time, or was this something later?
Later. At the time, I thought that being moody would, you know, just fucking get me everything. I thought that, you know, being moody was deep rather than annoying. And I still sometimes make that mistake.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I think we all do. It's just something that humans like to be thought of as serious, but like we're all just dumb creatures.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so you were went to NYU right after high school.
Yeah.
Okay, and had you been up to? I imagine you went up to New York State as a kid, being on the East Coast.
No,
Never been in New York.
Honestly, my first time visiting NYU was after I was accepted. My first time visiting New York City was after I was accepted.
Wow. Okay.
It was a total leap of faith. I've driven, because my parents are originally from Chicago, so I've been to Chicago a bunch, and I'd been on like states along the road to Chicago, but I'd never even been to New York State.
Yeah, I made my first trip there like a month or two ago.
Yeah.
But.
And I didn't even fall in love right away with it. I was just like, all right, this is where I'm going. I also was very burnt out at the end of high school, so I only applied to 2 schools.
What was the other one?
University of Miami was sort of my safety school.
So right, so it was the one right next to you, and the one that like was the dream, I guess, or
sort of the get me out of here. I don't even remember why I settled on NYU versus like Columbia or anything like that. I think it's just like. I think I was just so burnt out at the end of high school that I was like, I think I can get into this school. It's a good school, and I don't need to be worried about rejection.
Well, what did you major in?
I majored in English literature and journalism. I did a double major with a creative writing minor and a German minor.
Wow.
Yeah, and I remember none of the German.
Did you finish out that?
Yeah.
I
finished it, and then I went to... And then NYU had a grad school program where they had like 5 or 6 majors that they were like, hey, if you want to get a master's degree, stay here 1 more year and just power through a master's program. You can do that. And I was like, great, shit. Because again, I still I was doing comedy at that point, but I didn't know, comedy at that point was something that I really loved, but it wasn't a career. It was like open mics and shows that like people were like, you're funny. And I'm like, there's no money in this. And so I did that. I just got my master's.
And so you mentioned that you started the comedy. When did you start the comedy? In college?
I started the comedy junior year of college. So late junior year of college.
What was the inspiration there?
Well, I always liked making people laugh. And I always, that was like the one quality, even in high school, that I'd be like, okay, maybe I have this. Maybe this is a thing I can do. And I think there was a point where I just got, 1 or 2 people were like, you should try this out. And I got interested in it. And I also applied for, when I was a freshman, I think even, I just on a whim auditioned for NYU's improv team without taking any improv classes. And I got, to the final round and I didn't get it. And instead of saying, oh, I got to the final round with no training, this must mean I should get training and take some improv classes, I thought, well, this is another thing I'm not good at. So, over, 1 or 2 years, I slowly was like, people tell me I'm funny. Maybe I should go to an open mic and try this. And so I did. And then I kept doing it.
And then that's
it.
That's the story.
That's the story.
So, but by the time you were graduating, it hadn't turned into, you were still doing open mics and stuff like that.
I was still doing open mics and stuff. I had been able to sort of turn, I applied and luckily got an internship at SNL, which was cool.
That's awesome.
Internships are tough because you don't really get to do a lot and you don't get to interact a lot unless you really, really put yourself out there. But there's also that there's a very thin edge between putting yourself out there and being the annoying intern who's too involved.
Right.
And I think I sometimes erred on the annoying intern who was too involved. But I was lucky enough to have, at the time, Seth Meyers and Amy Poehler were doing Weekend Update, and they allowed 2 or 3 interns to start submitting Weekend Update jokes, and I was one of them. And another one was a writer named Jess Conrad, who eventually became a writer for Saturday Night Live. And she was preternaturally good at jokes. Just right off the bat, she was fucking nailing it. And it took me maybe a year and a half before I got anything on the show. It was after I was done being an intern. I just kept submitting.
Wow.
So, yeah, so that was kind of nice, too, because that also, I was just starting off comedy, but I also got something that sort of gave me training in joke writing on a professional level.
Sure.
Because something that I've realized as a comedian, seeing my other comedian friends, is some people are really amazing comedians on stage, but they're really not good at writing for other people.
Mm-hmm.
They just they just learn what their voice is. And
Sure.
my job as a comedy writer, which we can get to later, but my job as a comedy writer is not to write the funniest thing ever. It's to write the funniest thing that this person would say.
That Jimmy in this
that Jimmy would
situation
say,
or
that Seth would say,
Right.
or when I've written for Patton Oswalt at an award show or Andy Samberg at an award show. Each one of them has a different voice, and they have different things that they want to talk about.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Although, just to draw some comparisons here, the Patton Oswalt voice, your voice, kind of similar.
They're similar. They're similar, but the Andy Samberg voice is the most
totally
different voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So So what's the timeline here? You finished out and then interned, or you were interning while you were?
I interned senior year to grad school year. So 2006, I graduated, and in 2007, I graduated again.
Okay.
And then I got my first. I was working through this, but I got my first post-grad job. I had little jobs, but my first you're an adult now. Here's your health insurance job.
What was that?
That was I was writing for an advertising company focused that helped. I guess I don't know if you'd call it an advertising company or an advertising consulting company.
Okay.
But they helped write ads aimed at older people, and I quit after 6 weeks. I'd say I was fired because they kind of indicated that they were close to firing me. And I was like, I think I'm just, and it wasn't like, you can't fire me, I quit. They were like, listen, if you don't shape up, we're afraid we're going to have to let you go. And I was like, I think I'm going to go.
Why was it so bad? Or what was the situation?
They did the thing that my biggest pet peeve with a job is when people have to stay just because the boss is staying and there's not work to be done. I don't mind working late. I work,
I'm sure you work a lot.
Right, I work a lot now. I mean, I work, the job I work now, I put in more hours every week than I have any other job I've ever had. Mm-hmm. That said, because when I first got the job, they knew I was a comedian. They liked that, because writing companies always think it's nice when you're a comedian. Because writing funny is somewhat more difficult than it looks. Yeah. So they were like, okay, great, and I was like, so I do these shows at night. I would like to keep doing them. They're like, absolutely. So our hours are 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. I was like, great. And then the first day, I remember I finished up. They didn't have a lot of work for me. It was my first day, so I finished up in about 6:05 or so. I was like, okay, everybody, I'm leaving. And everyone's like, you're leaving? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, okay. And it was really weird. And for 2 weeks, everyone would look at me and again, there was no work to be done. It wasn't like I was and it wasn't like I was hitting the door hard or I wasn't making a big deal of it. I was just like, okay, computer shut down. And eventually the boss, because it was a small company, it was a relatively young company, he took me aside, he's like, hey, everyone's noticed you leave early. It's like, no, I've been leaving at 6. When you hired me, you told me that we're done at 6. He's like, yeah, but we really, you should really stay till everything's done. And I was like, well, all my work is done. And he's like, yeah, but everyone else is staying longer. And what I realized was that everyone was staying until he left, and then they'd leave right after. So, he'd leave, wait 5 minutes, everyone would leave. And I was like, this is not the way to do things. This is not a way to live. And I also hated the guy personally. The guy was just a piece of shit. He bragged about how good of a person he was for biking to work. He also had this weird way of it's always great when you are attracted to your spouse, but he would always be like, oh, my wife is so hot, and we'd always be like, okay,
that's so weird. I don't like that at all.
It was always in this weird where it's like I'm glad that you like your wife, but also stop telling me how hot your wife is. Because I'm your employee, I'm not your friend. Also,
even as a friend, it's kind of weird.
Also, I've also never met your wife, so it's double weird. Yeah. So yeah, and a few weeks in, I was doing this thing, and I think I was just clearly miserable, and I was still kind of leaving some days I'd stay and some days I'd leave at 6:30 or something because open mics are usually early in the day, relatively early in the day. So you can't really wait till 7:30, because they're usually the thing the club does early on so they can sell some drinks to some idiots who just want to be comedians. So eventually he was just like, listen, you need to really get with the company or we're going to let you go. And I was like, I think this is not a good fit for me.
Yeah.
And, looking back, that could have been the dumbest move. Also, I'm standing by my window, so if you hear reggaeton music, there's cars driving by.
Okay.
But yeah, so I left, and I was really scared. I was really, really scared that I had just made a huge mistake. And the thing is, I've had bad jobs before that I didn't quit. I think this situation was just this is going to be a situation where I'm going to hate my life.
Yeah.
I'm going to hate my life, and the pay and the benefits and what I'm doing aren't good enough to justify that. If it was some crazy creative job and it was a lot of fun and it paid good, I was just this is not going to be the first post-college job forever thing.
Right. And so you were advertising, you were kind of using your degree, right? As much as I hate to admit it, a lot of people go to journalism school or whatever for PR or marketing or what have you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were kind of doing that, but the comedy was, I guess creative writing is, tied to comedy, but eventually you just kind of forsook, I don't know how the past tense of forsake, but you left that path basically.
Basically, yeah. After that, my friend was working at Showtime, which was trying to do sort of they wanted to sort of create a video game service. Sort of I guess sort of their version of Steam, you could say.
Okay, so downloadable stuff?
Downloadable stuff.
Showtime?
Showtime.
That's okay.
And nobody's ever heard of this.
Yeah.
And it's not a secret. I don't think it's a secret. I think it just, it didn't
happen.
It didn't happen. So I worked there, and it was a really cool job. It was actually a really fun job. It wasn't comedy related at all. I was basically just editing all of the descriptions of games, and making sure the tags that identify them were correct and that the games that in the service were. So it's a combination of tester and tag editor and description editor.
Yeah, databasing and stuff.
But the staff was really cool. Everyone was really excited about it, and it was basically just me messing with video games all day.
Yeah.
And then the financial collapse happened.
Okay, so this is 2008.
Showtime was this is costing us a lot of money. Yeah, 2008. This was around 2008, 2000.
Okay.
Yeah, 2008, 2009. And the financial collapse happened, and Showtime was nope, and they pulled the plug on it.
Oh.
And I was out of a job again. But everyone there was so cool, and it was it was really sad to see because it wasn't. And Showtime wasn't even they weren't mean about it. They weren't you failed. They were just our funding's drying up as is. This is making us no money. It's an investment that wouldn't pay off for years. That's it.
Yeah.
It also sucked because I think 2 or 3 weeks before they closed it down, there was rumblings that it was going bad, but I think there was it'll be fine, don't worry. It's just a rough patch. And I actually got a big raise. I got a raise that was at the time just seemed this insane amount of money. And now it's not a ton of money, but for someone who's sort of just out of college, it was I think something like 50 or 60,000. Where I was wow,
that's pretty good.
Yeah, I was yay.
First job, second job out of college.
First and a half job. The first job.
Yeah, right.
I wasn't there that long.
Yeah.
I was so excited, and then it just disappeared.
Yeah, that sucks.
It's kind of nice that it disappeared before I got the raise, just so I wasn't adjusting to some higher pay scale and then losing it.
Right.
Anyway, so then that happened. I was out of a job for a couple months and really desperate. And then I was, luckily enough, SNL had an assistant job open up, a photo researching job. And I took that, and I kept writing Weekend Update. I was still writing Weekend Update jokes this whole time, maybe once in a while getting one on and getting $100 from it, here or there. And I think that they liked me, and they knew. And the thing is, I was doing photo researching, and they knew I was trying to get into Weekend Update as a writer. But they were like, "Listen, you're not ready to be a writer here. But it's helpful that you know jokes, because if you're finding a photo for a joke about Obama, you want a photo that tips the right way. You don't want one if it's a story where it's good news, you want one where he looks happy. It sounds obvious, but it's so easy to research the wrong photo for a Weekend Update thing. Because it's a visual language. You're trying to hint or tip the joke a certain way.
Right.
So they hired me. I did that for about 2 years, 2 seasons, and it was awesome. It was an awesome job. It was really fun. I got to be, like, in the middle of it. I was going to after parties and, like, you know, I wasn't a writer, but I was getting a lot of shit on the show, and I was really excited, and, like, I was well-liked.
Yeah.
And after 2 years, I was sort of like, hey, I'm getting a lot on the show now, Weekend Update-wise. Could I possibly write for the show? And they were like, not really. We don't have any space open, which was fair. Fair. I mean, you know, there's other people getting stuff on the show, and there's other better writers who aren't freelancing but could probably also apply and be a better joke writer.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I was like, all right, I'll put in 2 years, and I also didn't want to fall into the trap of, like, just being, like, the good freelancer who's an assistant forever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't want to be like, yeah, I write for SNL. Like, I wasn't doing it just for the title. I wanted to, like, you know. So, a friend of mine was working at Nintendo at the time and said they were looking for a localization writer.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, yeah, all right. So I applied for that, and I got that job, and I moved out to Seattle.
I was going to say, that's in Seattle.
That's in Seattle, so
right?
I moved my whole life to Seattle, and it was just this crazy, like, sort of like, because I've always loved Nintendo, and I still love Nintendo, and I was like, yeah, okay, you know what, I'm mad at life right now, I could do a change, and so I moved out to Seattle, and I worked at Nintendo for a couple of years.
So you left after 2 seasons at SNL, and then what year did you...
I moved to
Seattle.
I moved to Seattle 2000. I want to say 2010. That sounds right.
Okay. And what were you working on? Because you weren't a translator, to be clear. You were localizing translated.
Yeah. The way
words
and different localization departments work differently, but the way Nintendo worked was you'd have a partner who was a translator, and you'd go back and forth, and you know, it's not like a factory line where he gives you a bit of text and he goes, okay, here's this, and then you go, okay, it's translated. It's
right.
Okay, here's this situation in the game. Here's what they're trying to convey, and I'm like, okay, what if we conveyed it this way? And then he goes back to the team and he's like, what if we conveyed it this way? And they're like, okay, because a lot of the people on the Japanese side speak English. It's just not. It's not about making like it grammatically make sense. It's about making it culturally make sense.
Right.
It also fits certain standards of what Nintendo wants to do as a business. And I know there's controversy around that. I was never involved in anything controversial, so I never had to deal with anything like that. But a lot of it, you know, there's always this weird perception that localizers are like these, like, you know, social justice cowboys who are like going in and being like, I'm going to remove all the boobs. And that's not what it is. It's a lot of like, you know, like Nintendo saying, I wonder if will this situation be a problem? We're trying to go for this rating, or our market is this age group. Like, if they're making a game for 8 to 13-year-olds, even if it's going to be played by older people, they have certain standards they want, and they want you to look out for that.
They can't have face rubbing in it.
Yeah, they can't have face rubbing in it.
So to cite the controversial thing I think you were talking about earlier, or mentioned earlier. And
again, I wasn't there for that, and I wasn't part of that, so I don't...
Yeah.
But, you know, it's this collaborative effort in the company, and, you know, my job was to be like, okay, or like, you know, the translator would be like, okay, this guy has, like, this character sounds really tough. The way he speaks makes him sound tough, and I was like, okay, so maybe he has, like, a Brooklyn accent or something, or like a, you know what I mean, like, or like, he's sort of like, you know, because again, it's not like, you know, it'll be like a fantasy environment where someone, like, has, like, the equivalent of a mafia accent, and you're like, okay, well, how do I make that make sense to American, like, someone reading text where they automatically just read the way you're phrasing something, where they go, I understand who he is, or she is.
Right.
And that's a lot of fun, and it's creative. And it was a good job. It was a really fun job.
Well, so what were some of the games you worked on?
I worked on Kid Icarus Uprising for the 3DS, which had a lot of dialogue.
That's a pretty funny game too,
that
right?
was a lot of fun to work on. I was the second lead on that one. It was me and another writer, and then she had a translator and I had a translator. I worked on Mario Party 9, which was surprisingly fun to work on. Because you get to just...
I'm sure, like, I mean, like a lot of puns and stuff?
You come up with puns. I came up with Pizza Me Mario. which I will always be proud of.
Yeah, it's great.
You know, and you just play Mario Party all day, which is kind of cool too. Like it's like you and your translator being like, okay, how do we name this? Let's play this game for 30 minutes and figure it out.
Right.
So it was a lot of fun. I did, and like at Nintendo, they'll have meetings where like everyone pitches in. At Fallon, we call them gang rights, and it totally applies to the same. And we didn't have a name for it, but it was the same thing at Nintendo, where they're like, okay, here's 20 enemies in a Kirby game. What should we name them? And so, like, they'll have a picture on a projector, and they have a whiteboard, and we're just writing out names. And it's a lot of fun, because it's like you in a room just having, like, fun, shouting out names, and you're, like, naming characters in the Nintendo canon. Like, I named a character in Skyward Sword. I named a character named Groose.
Oh, yeah. I remember, I heard you on a podcast talking about it. That's people love that character, right. At least, so you had at least that part.
So I have that little thing, like, just the name.
Yeah.
And it's just such a cool special thing to have. Like it's such a nice thing, and it's not like, you know, it wasn't like some brilliant moment where I was like, boys, Groose. It was just like, okay, here's what we know, and you have maybe 15 names on a board, and they're looking at it like, all right, I think this is the one. We'll see if Japan likes it. We'll see if legal can clear it, which is its own process.
Yeah.
You know, there's also, you know, sometimes like what I wasn't there for was being in the meetings for swear filters. That apparently is a lot of fun.
What do you mean? Like, what's the process there?
It's just,
like they're just
saying the worst shit you can think of to block.
Oh, okay.
So, like,
so like for like things that are online or something.
Or like, you know,
Animal
Crossing or whatever, just like things to block.
Sure, okay.
So
That's funny.
I was never in those meetings, but apparently they're a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I was there about 2 years, and I think after Kid Icarus and after Mario Party, I was a little burnt out. And it wasn't, and it's an awesome company to work for. Like, it's a Japanese company, but they really care about their employees. But I think I was just burnt out, and I was still doing stand-up, and I just wanted to do something, you know, I wanted to, like, stretch my legs a bit. And IGN offered me a job to be a comedy writer for them. They wanted funny videos about video games. And, it was more money, and I didn't realize I'd be paying way more money to live in San Francisco. So I was like, yeah, of course. I mean, this will be great. And I did that. And so I went to San Francisco and I worked for IGN for about a year.
Well, so were you kind of burnt out at Nintendo? This is something I was thinking of when you mentioned how you had to bring it to legal and stuff like that. Was the process of writing there kind of not restrictive, but a little limiting because you had to like bring a thing to a person who brought it to a person who brought it to a person?
Yes. And it's not like, and they're not, you know, they're all just trying to do their jobs, you know.
Sure.
But
they're making a product that like millions of people will see or buy, especially like, you know, aimed at the family audience generally. So that makes sense. But
it was just like, I think a little frustrating as a creative person because there'd be and it's an awesome place to work, and it's like if the opportunity arose again, I'd definitely consider it. Like it's not like somewhere I've burned the bridge to. I think at the time I was just really into doing comedy and I wanted to do more. And the cool thing about that job is sometimes you just wouldn't have a lot to do. And so you like there are times when, like that's when Minecraft was first in like its beta, like it wasn't even a mobile version. And I remember we all played Minecraft a lot and it was fun, but there was also an element of like, all right, I want to do something. I want to do something though. I want to work on something. And then you'd work on something and it'd be like, work as hard as you can on this for a couple months. And then you'd have to like wait and see if they liked it for months. So there's like a lot of like a hurry up and wait, which you do get in television still. But there was just more of like, you know, I think just the process of it at the time burned me out a little. You know, I was also going through like personal stuff, I think, where I was just like, I'm ready to change my life. So, so I changed my life and I went to San Francisco.
Yeah, then that's how I became aware of you.
Oh, thank you.
Because you wrote for Up at Noon,
which is still a thing, which is still a crazy thing. Yeah, that was really cool, and I had the most fun in the world working with Brian and Greg.
Yeah, they're funny guys.
Brian was so much fun, like to work with. We'd have these meetings. We got in trouble because we'd leave messages on the board that we shouldn't have left on the board.
What does that mean? Messages?
Just like I know what you did. We'd like write that
Oh,
because
okay.
the conference room had whiteboards because they also had business meetings. They also had like
Right.
adults talking about like money, and like we just write
Yeah.
I know what you did, and they'd be like, please don't do that to our board.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I did that, and in the middle of that, or in July of that year I was there, I did something called the Montreal Comedy Festival, which is the biggest comedy festival in the world, and I was what's called a new face of comedy.
Yeah, that's like a thing, right, within
Yeah.
the comedy community? Because I've heard of people talking about that before, like specifically the new face of comedy.
Yeah, it's a huge honor, and
Yeah.
I had tried out 4 times before I got it.
Hmm.
And the first 3 times I tried out, I was like, yeah, I got this. Of course I got this. I'm so good. And then the 4th time I got it, the show was terrible. Nobody did well. And I remember just being like, all right, I didn't get it. And then I got it. And so I did that.
Huh.
And it was also the 2012 election around this time.
Uh-huh.
And I was tweeting a lot about that, and I was having fun, like just making fun of politics. And by chance, someone from Late Night with Jimmy Fallon saw me at Montreal. They read my tweets, and they were like, hey, 2 of our writers are leaving. Would you like to apply for a job here? And I was like, I've actually applied for a job there a couple times, and you guys have never gotten back to me. And they said, we don't remember that at all. And so so I applied again, and I got it. I got the job. And so I left IGN and moved back to New York.
And is that the longest gig so far?
That's actually this is the longest I've ever had, like, continually had a job. Like, if you count my internships and my, assistantship at SNL, I probably was at SNL technically longer. But as far as, like, just a contiguous job,
sure.
This is the longest job I've ever had in my life. Which is very strange.
Well, it seems like, obviously, there's reasons for that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, you went 2012, you said? You were coming up, you joined the writing staff when, like, I mean, he was already big, but, like, I feel like Fallon was really blowing up then, right? I don't know, like, people were talking about him all the time, things were going viral or whatever.
Things were going viral. My first day was January 2nd, 2013.
Okay.
And it was still late night. It was still Late Night with Jimmy Fallon when I was hired.
Right.
And I remember, like, they hired us, and there was another guy who was hired at the same time I was. Mm-hmm. They hired us, and it was, like, cool, and it was, like, very chill. And around April, they were like, hey, we might become The Tonight Show. And we were like...
In April of 2013?
And we were like...
Yeah, because it went over in 2014, right?
And we were like, what? Didn't that just happen, that whole thing? And they were like, yeah. And we also, like, in, like, March, we, like, switched floors, and they were like, oh, it's for something. And I was like, all right, I don't ask questions. And it was so weird. Like, we just moved one floor up, but it was, like, this whole to-do. And we were still late night this whole time. And then, like, April, they're like, oh, we're going to become The Tonight Show. And we're like, really? Do we have to move again? And they were like, no, everything else is the same. And so it was this very strange process where we became The Tonight Show. In a year. So we went from late night to Tonight Show, and I got to be part of the launch of a new Tonight Show, which is bizarre, which should not be. Yeah. I should not be. I don't know why I'm a part of this.
Don't say
No. I mean, it's not like it's just the weirdest because there's times when, you forget what you do for a living, and it sounds like an arrogant thing, like, I forget, but, like, literally, like, sometimes I'll come to work and be like, fuck, I don't know, I don't have any jokes. Oh, there's cornbread in the kitchen, wow, and, like, oh, free pizza, oh, right, this will be a great Monday, and then I'm like, no, I'm writing for television, like, go focus on your jokes. But it's really cool. It's been a really cool experience, and it's like, I think that when we became The Tonight Show, we were, like, so worried about, like, making sure we preserve the legacy. Like, Jimmy really wanted to bring back that sort of old-timey New York feel that Jack Parr and the early Johnny Carson had, where it felt like this, like, hip, cool show. And it's cool that we've done that. Like, it's cool to have, like, put together a show that, like, people seem to really like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know numbers wise or ratings wise or whatever. You don't have to
Yeah.
talk about that if you don't want to. But I think it's the biggest one. Like just from what my impressions of it,
Yeah.
it's like definitely.
It does. It's right now. It's the biggest one. I mean, obviously, like if Colbert or Kimmel has a big guest or something.
Sure. There's like all those guys are
They're all
great,
great.
but I just feel like
Well,
Fallon is always like, especially I'm in college.
Right,
I'm 19. And I feel among my demographic, Fallon is like far and away the most popular.
Thank you. And we very much tried to keep our audience happy. And of course everyone's friends with the other shows too. Like like I was at a party 2 nights ago with like people from Colbert. Like we're all very cool. There's always this weird assumption on the internet because I'll like check internet comments because I'm terrible, and people will be like, Colbert for life, Jimmy Fallon.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, everyone's friends. We're all on board with each other.
I'm not trying to incite you to go fuck Colbert or whatever.
No, and I never would because the magic of the internet and DVRs is that we can all watch all of them. Because I enjoy what he does and I enjoy what Kimmel does and I enjoy what my boss does or I wouldn't be there.
Well, it's funny those people on the internet. It's like the kind of people who are like, let's say you have a friend named Joe, and they tell you, Mike, like, Joe fucking sucks. Like, fuck you, Joe's my friend. Like, it's kind of this weird, like, they don't understand that there's, you're all creative people in the same space.
Or like I saw, like, this comment, something about Seth, because Seth just had a baby, and so he's done a bunch of sketches about having a baby. People are like, we get it, Seth, you had a baby. Oh, now we have to hear about it on television. I'm like, what do you want? What are you looking for?
Yeah.
What makes you happy?
Well, it's so funny because these shows are based on the personality of these people. Like it's called the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, or I forget, like Late Night with Seth Meyers, whatever. So it's like, they're going to talk about those things.
They're going to talk about their lives because and that's what they are. They're people always ask me like, oh, are you afraid of like YouTube? What YouTube can do? And I'm like, no, talk shows and sketch shows are made for YouTube. We didn't know it. They didn't know it in 1950. But it's just, that's what a lot of YouTube stars are. They just have very small scale talk shows. Mm-hmm. I don't know about other scripted series, but we're fine. Yeah. But like a lot of people, and the other thing, people I think on the internet, like they're like, oh, can't believe like Seth did this sketch. Like it just wasn't up to. It's like it was probably written that morning. Like late night shows, we have such a fast turnover rate that it's not always going to be like like an episode of Game of Thrones where it's like perfectly crafted. Right.
Well, the thing you mentioned about YouTube is that, and a lot of the Fallon stuff blows up on Tonight Show stuff blows up on YouTube.
Yeah.
Like you guys have a big YouTube following as well. Yeah. People catching stuff after the fact and stuff like that.
We've been very, and that's something that Jimmy did. Jimmy, when he started Late Night in 2009, before I was there, he said, this is going to be the way that people digest, these shows. And I think a lot of people were like, okay, whatever. Because YouTube was big, but I think it was still sort of like, you could see a cat. Or like you'd catch like a pirated version of an SNL sketch.
Yeah.
And I think Jimmy was like, no, this is how people are going to watch stuff. They're going to watch it online. And everyone's like, whatever. And now, because he embraced that, I feel like he understands that space.
Mm-hmm. And so let's talk a little bit just about how like the day-to-day of writing for Tonight Show. Like, what does your day look like in general?
I usually get up when I first started, I got up at 5 in the morning and came in like crack of dawn.
That's too
early. I was very nervous and I wanted to show that I was dedicated.
Sure. Yeah, that's always how it starts. That's how it always starts, rather.
And then I think I sort of got a better sense of how I write and a better sense of how the show sounds. Because you sort of learn the voice as you go on. And so now I usually wake up about 6:30 or so. Get to work.
Still too early.
Get to work. By the way, everyone at the show has a different writing method. Some people write from home in the morning.
Sure.
And then they roll in like at 10 a.m. Some people come in as early as I do. It's just sort of like, because we have deadlines, but there's no like card to punch. But for me, if I'm at my home computer, I'm going to like open up Steam or something. I'm going to get distracted.
Yeah.
So I get in early. So I get to work probably like 7:30, 7:45. Backing up a bit, on the subway in the morning, I'll like read over the news. We usually get from like our producers will get like, here's the news that happened.
Sure.
You know, here's the debate. Here's a summary of this. Here's a summary of like that.
Yeah.
And I'll read over that and I'll be like, oh, this might be a good idea. That might be a good idea. Get coffee or whatever. And then I pitch a few ideas. I pitch like a few small sketches for the monologue. You know, whether that's like sort of a funny list or like a funny video. I'll write out those pitches, send those in. And then for about 2.5 or 3 hours, I just write monologue jokes.
So are people segmented into monologue writers or sketch writers, or is it kind of just like everyone contributes?
They are segmented, but the way they're segmented is more like a specialty. You're not like locked.
Sure.
You know.
So it allows for a little bit of movement if you got a good idea. Or whatever.
You know, generally like everyone's writing for everything, but they're sort of like, okay, you do this mostly. If we have an emergency, this is what we'll turn to.
Sure.
So yeah, so I wrote a bunch of monologue jokes, and I'm more on the monologue side because I'm more of a joke person. I write a bunch of monologue jokes, send them in. You know, if there's changes to if a sketch that I wrote is picked and I need to change it, I'll rewrite that. You know, I'll write thank you notes and stuff like that based on whatever day it is. We have different morning deadlines, different days. And so yeah, so I'll write thank you notes, stuff like that, send in my jokes, wait a bit to see, you know, what I got picked. You know, and then after that we have things like, we'll have like more, you know, breaking news where we have to write on that. Then we have a couple meetings. There's something called the creative meeting, which is where Jimmy picks sketches.
Okay.
So, and that's more just like him being like, okay, so he goes through this, he picks, like, okay, I want to do this, don't want to do that, or change this, whatever.
But he's very involved.
He's very involved. He gets there early. Okay. He's there early in the morning. He stays late at night. He's very involved. I feel like, and I've said this before, there's this old story that I think people assume is true about every late night host, and that's like at the end of his run, Johnny Carson would show up at like 3 p.m., tape at 5, and go home.
Yeah, roll in, roll out, like instantly. Yeah,
and maybe that's what Johnny Carson did when he'd been doing it for 30 years. But we're not like that, and you know, Seth's not like nobody's like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jimmy's there all the time, and he's super involved, and he really cares about, you know, what he's doing. To the point sometimes when, like, you know, you'll get a note where it's like, hey, you know, he didn't really like this, you know, but maybe try this, and you're like, I mean, I don't know. Okay, wait, actually, no, it's Jimmy. I'll do it. Like in your head, you do that thing that everybody does, where you're like, man, my boss. Then you're like, no, he understands what he will be saying for himself on live television.
Yeah.
And he's so good at that too. He's so good at punching things up.
He's a comedian himself, so you respect that.
And he's also
like he's just some dude.
Well, he's also very good at knowing. You know, he knows what obviously he knows what his voice is, but he's so good at like giving you notes where you're like, oh, of course that's the way to do that. You'll spend 2 hours working on something for him, and then in like 10 minutes he'll be like, well, this is how you fix it. And you're like, God damn it, that is how you fix it. I don't like, you know, where you're like, this is broken. This is unfixable, and then he fixes it.
Yeah. That's a great thing for a boss, ostensibly to do.
So he's really good at that. Yeah, so then, so after creative meeting, then we have the monologue meeting, which is where we just pick jokes that go into the rehearsal. And that's just more like, they have to separate them because let me back up a bit. Creative meeting also involves people who have to do technical elements. So if there's a video edit, you know, the graphic people have to work on that. Or if there's like, you know, singing, you know, we have to make sure the lighting guys can do like a spotlight and the Roots can get the song. So that has to be earlier than the monologue meeting. Monologue is just like, okay, here's some words that we can paint on cue cards, and that requires less production. Right. So then we have monologue meeting. He goes through monologue, picks stuff. Then we have a rehearsal in front of a live audience, and that's like an audience of people who, you know, basically couldn't get tickets to the live show, not to the live show, to the real taping. And based on that, you know, he'll cut stuff, he'll add stuff, he'll improvise stuff. Based on that, we have what goes into the show at 5 p.m., and then we tape at 5.
It's tape at 5, okay. That's, I mean, I don't know how it compares, because I've seen some other late night shows. I don't know how that is that relatively late?
No, that's pretty
just about
pretty standard.
Okay.
Seth's show tapes, I think, an hour and a half later, and that's just because they're on, like, the floor above us. So, like, our noise would carry.
Right.
Or they're below us? I think they're above us. Anyway. But
it would interfere, basically,
it would interfere.
if you were both doing it at the same time.
Yeah. So it's about five or so, yeah.
Okay. So, and then do you write some more after or during the taping, rather? Because I'm sure you're not, like, out there every day watching.
Yeah, we write during the taping, and we write pitches for the next day that are due at 6.
And then are you out the door at 6, or are you late? Are you out late?
Depends on what we need to do. Usually out the door about 6. Sometimes it'll be like, hey, we have this big project coming up. Could you stay a bit late and write for that? Or
still a long day.
It's a long day. It's a long day.
Yeah. Because you say out at 6, it doesn't sound that late, but you're there, like you said, like 7:30, and then the nature of the job is you're always thinking about jokes. You know, every time you see the news and
emergencies where something happens. You know, something gets cut at the last minute. So there's definitely moments when you sort of get like, you're like, oh, I'm screwed. You know, where you're like, oh no, like there's definitely been times when like breaking news has happened. You're like, oh God, we have like 30 minutes before we tape, but we need to write on this. You know, I forget what it was, but there was something in the last couple months that wasn't like, and it's not like breaking news like a tornado, like we're not writing on tragedies, but sometimes we're like, this is something everyone's going to talk about.
Well, like Trump said something dumb
right,
or something,
but sometimes
right?
it's like so insane that you're like, this is going to go viral right now. We need to get something on it. Yeah, it's a long day, but it's cool because at the end of the day, you sort of like, on a good day, it's cool. On a good day when you have a lot of stuff in the show and you're like, yeah, all right, I wrote for the show. And on a bad day, you're like, I hate myself. Which is any job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's great. Like, it sounds like it's a really creatively fulfilling job.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, you're obviously doing great work there.
Thank you.
I mean, I don't know what jokes, because of course you're writing it in
Jimmy's voice,
so I don't know which ones are yours, but they're all good. So.
I try to I sometimes have a lot of the depressing jokes, but I like that.
Okay, that makes sense.
My favorite thank you note I ever wrote was it was, you ever see like cartoon ghosts like in elementary school when they'd have like little drawing of a little ghost and it has like a little smile on his face, and I wrote thank you cartoon ghost for letting me know how happy I'll be when I'm dead. And the audience was so not on board with it that I loved it. I loved it.
Like they didn't react?
They were just like, oh, and I was like, yes, give in to your hate.
See, that's like legitimately funny to me, but I know people are like, that's too dark. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
And
that's what comedy is.
Right, and that's the thing too, is like, especially with things like thank you notes, a lot of it's like, okay, well, where's the Venn diagram? Like, what is the Venn diagram of me and Jimmy? Because Jimmy, like, you know, he has not like he has a dark side, like he's done some dark shit. Like, not like that.
He's a human. He's been sad before.
He's been sad before, and also he finds some things that are like, because that's dark, but it's also cartoony dark.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So he's definitely had moments like that when he's like, you know, like, he's like, yeah, this is funny. It's funny. Also, it's a cartoon ghost. Nobody's getting it.
Yeah. That's funny.
So yeah, it's a very cool job. It's very nice, and Jimmy's so fucking cool. I probably shouldn't say fucking cool like that, but he's so cool. It just sounds so weird to say that. He's so fucking cool. He's a very cool boss.
Yeah, it sounds like it. He sounds like he's just an involved guy. That's good. Well, so and this whole time you've been doing all this stuff. You've been doing a lot of stand-up.
Been doing stand-up. You know, also been writing like a little bit for like Giant Bomb.
Yeah, I see that sometimes. Yeah. You did like
about virtual reality.
Game of the Year or something?
I did a Game of the Year thing. I also wrote about virtual reality a bit. Because I still love video games. I still want to be involved in video games. I just do as much as I can.
Yeah, is the stand-up, how often do you do it?
I do stand-up
a
fair amount I do it a fair amount around New York. The only problem with stand-up I have is that because of our schedule, it's a little difficult to go on the road sometimes. Because road shows tend to be Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Yeah.
That said, that is a sacrifice I'm very willing to make to work for The Tonight Show.
Right.
And I still do Comic-Cons and stuff, so you know, you find a good balance, and you sort of feel fulfilled doing it. Because for me, a lot of stand-up was also, it wasn't about just getting a job, but it was also like, hey, I just want to be creative. And as long as I get to be creative in different ways, I sort of feel like I'm fulfilling my duty to myself.
Yeah, I mean, you've done a lot of different, like, generally you've done a lot of comedy
Right.
stuff, but it's all very different,
Yeah.
right? Like, you wrote jokes for stuff at Nintendo, but that's way different than Up at
Right.
Noon and way different than
And
Night
I'm
Show
really glad I got to do all those. You know, I
Mhm.
wouldn't trade any of those experiences. Not because, not like those experiences led to this moment. I'm like, no, because I got to write for Nintendo.
Yeah.
Like, nobody can ever take that away from me, so I'm very lucky to have had each and every one of those experiences.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting path you have.
Thank you.
With all this stuff, and you do great work. I enjoy your Twitter. You know, I don't usually think of Twitter as like a work. I don't want of any kind, but your Twitter timeline and we mentioned Patton Oswalt earlier, and Patton Oswalt's Twitter are like two of the funniest things I regularly consume.
Thank you. That's very nice of you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I work. I try to like keep that going because again, it's something I really like doing.
Yeah, it's funny because like Twitter jokes work a certain way, but like I know there's some comedians who are like, I'm giving away free content basically, but it's like I don't know, it's kind of a different medium.
It's
like
a different medium. It's also like so give away free content, so make more content.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't like people who steal content. That I'm not cool with.
No,
but at the same time, like, you know, you're also going to
have more material or something, or you know.
Also, you're giving away free content when you do a show in New York that costs $5. Like, you're not, you know, if you're walking home with $30 in your pocket for doing, like, you know, a show, you're not, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like, I've changed the game.
Right. Just make people happy on Twitter.
Just make people happy.
Yeah. Well, thanks for talking, Mike. It was a great conversation.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry if I rambled a bit.
Oh, no. That's totally what I want.
Oh, cool.
And you didn't ramble at all. I like going deep, so.
Well, cool.
That's what they say about me. I like to go deep.
That's totally cool.
Great talk with Mike. Really fun. Really funny, I'll say, even. I forgot to ask Mike if you wanted to plug anything. I mean, I think tonight's show can limp on without my help. But he's on Twitter at Mike Drucker as well. Check out all that stuff that he does. Like we mentioned his Twitter. That's the main thing is I just want you to follow him on Twitter because he tweets out very funny jokes often. But thank you again to Mike for coming on the show. Next week, I don't know who's on. We're living by the seat of our pants. I've got lots of bookings in the works, and they're all going to happen quickly after each other, and then I'll have some more in the can. But I don't know. It's kind of up in the air who's going to be on the next show. But whoever it is, they're going to be great. I can guarantee it. Interesting thing that happened. One of the people in the works was recommended to me by a friend of mine on Twitter. And I don't know if he saw it or anything, but I emailed him later and he said sure. So, and I wasn't super familiar. I wasn't super familiar with this person, but it like I knew some of his stuff, and I'm like, oh, cool, I'd love to talk to him. And so I emailed him, and now it's in the works. So I liked that. I liked that someone was like, hey, you should check out this person, and it was someone that was outside of my wheelhouse. So go ahead and do that. You can do that through all the channels, the various social media conduits. The podcast is on Facebook, Butterfly Effect Podcast. It's on YouTube, Butterfly Effect Podcast as well there. It's on Twitter, at Butterfly Pod. I'm on Twitter, at Eddletod, ETTLETODD. And you can email me at trettleman@gmail.com, TRETTLEMAN @gmail, and any of those things. If you just scream words into your computer, and it'll reach me somehow, I'm sure. If you want to see certain people on the show, because like I said, I want to move outside of my wheelhouse of people that I'm familiar with. So there you go. That's all. That's the show. Have fun. See you next week. It'll be a great person. I guarantee it. Thanks for listening.